So welcome everyone to the 5th annual Writers Read celebration. I'm Nancy McCarthy and I will be your host for the evening. I will be like do you remember the old Master Theater shows where the host would sit in a chair and talk about the program? Well, that's what I'm going to be doing tonight. I will be introducing our guests. This is the 5th year for the celebration, and after 2 years of presenting the region's talented writers on Zoom, we're happy to be back in person at the Cannon Beach Library. Yay! The Writers Read celebration is organized by the library's Northwest Authors Series Committee. In addition to Writers Read, the committee hosts an author every month from September through May, and you're always welcome to join us for that. And we have other events as well. Phyllis Burnt. Phyllis, will you raise your hand or stand or something? Hi. She's the chair of the library board, but she's also the chair of the Northwest Authors Committee and kind of keeps us in line, sort of like herding cats. Also on the committee are myself and Doug Sagana. Doug, will you raise your hand? Hi, Doug. And Pam Crone. There she is, back there. Pam. And Wanda Meyer Price, and I don't think she's here. I think she's in Mexico right now. Wow. Cameron Lira, who works at the Cannon Beach Book Company, also assisted us with the selection of the writers. I don't think Cammy's here tonight. Also, without the help of our library manager and technological wizard, Jen Dixon, we wouldn't have been able to pull this off. So thank you, Jen. Thank you for everything you do. I appreciate it.
Like that wolf.
This year, we chose the theme of Hemingway at the beach. What would he say? I'm not sure how we came up with that theme. People have been asking.
Really?
But we knew we wanted to get away from the more serious themes we had during the pandemic years, including the theme pandemic, and followed closely by recovery. Our earlier themes focused on the view from the North Coast, which somewhat limited the interest to residents and visitors familiar with the North Coast. We also grew very weary of reading stories and poems about lonely people leaving their footprints on the sand. But since we now have the opportunity to Zoom our writers in from anywhere, and we have 5 of them tonight, and since we are mostly recovered from COVID, we wanted to stretch our participants' imagination and challenge them to try a different writing style. Ernest Hemingway is known for his clean, succinct verse writing style. He's also known for his life on the sea and for living by the sea. We decided we could maintain the beach theme and still challenge our writers as well as ourselves. We received 47 submissions, and we selected 16 based on how closely they followed the theme, their word usage, writing style, and the emotions the piece evoked. Each entry was limited to 600 words. And sometimes we came right up to the edge of those 600 words. And sometimes we came very small. And we'll see how that works. A short story in about 4 lines. The committee chose the pieces without knowing who wrote them. As you will hear tonight, those poems and short stories often reflect Hemingway's style, or maybe reflect a style he might have wanted to experiment with. They range from North Coast locals talking to and drinking with Hemingway to Hemingway's own observations taking flight, literally, while he visits the beach. Writers told us that this year's theme was fun, a great experience, and intriguing. One of our writers, as you will hear later, completely changed her mind about Hemingway as a writer and a person. Tonight, I will introduce the writers and they will read their entries. After everyone has read, I will open it up to the audience for questions, so nobody go anywhere. So let's get started. Our first writer this week, who knows, is Darryl Kluge. He's from Cannon Beach, and his story is called The Passing Visitor. Daryl is a retired educator from Portland who lives full-time in a small Cannon Beach cottage with his partner Susan and their cat Milo. He reads for pleasure, studies out of habit, and writes for fun. He is fond of coffee shops, bookstores, and road trips, as well as attending concerts and plays up and down the coast. He spends most mornings in his chair of contemplation, trying to answer life's enduring questions. He has more questions than answers. Please help me welcome Daryl Kluge.
Yeah, questions about life. Well, here we go. This is a tale of Ernest Hemingway, and it's called The Passing Visitor. At his home in Ketchum, Idaho, on July 2nd, 1961, Ernest Hemingway, the winner of the 1954 Nobel Prize in Literature, used his favorite shotgun to kill himself. The macho sportsman, adventurer, and famed American writer was dead. His rough and tough life blown away by inner demons. This larger-than-life feast of a man no longer would move about the far corners of the world, except for one brief, forgotten episode of the Hemingway legend. In a small coastal town on the upper left edge of Oregon, folks who would never admit the sightings of Elvis tapped a finger aside of their nose, and they tell the tale of a hard-drinking, gray-bearded man who held court one afternoon in a local haunt. Some say they saw him for real. Others wonder. It all began on a gray, misty July morning when a man wearing a brown tweed jacket over a red plaid shirt suddenly appeared on a bench in the town square. His gray flannel slacks ended atop a pair of brown loafers. His gray hair hung down to his shirt collar, and a short gray beard with a white mustache covered his face. After giving thought to where he was, he rose, shook himself with a shudder, and walked across the street toward a sign that said Driftwood Tavern. The bell on the church tower tolled out 12. Now, I know this story for true. I was eating lunch inside the Driftwood when a large figure filled the doorway, a dark silhouette framed by the afternoon light. He entered, took the empty round table in the middle of the room, ordered a double bourbon with water, tossed it back in one gulp, then ordered another. His voice was loud and brusque. "What place is this?" he suddenly said, to no one in particular. "Seems a quaint little town. I do not like crowded places." He took a swig. "They're stifling. I like the open West. Wyoming, Montana, Spain, Africa, and Idaho. Does it rain here? God damn, I hate to go out in the rain." He was not a man to be rushed. He paused, ordered another bourbon and water. He noticed the folks crowding in from the street. "What do you do here?" "It looks like a bunch of old loggers and beatniks." "I fish, hunt, travel, write. Also, I'm up early." I write best as the sun rises. My mind starts making sentences. I write them down as fast as I can to get rid of them. You don't do straight. Are you good people? Do you treat each other right? He waited and then continued. Writing is lonely work. Without loneliness, writing would suffer. Each day, I face eternity alone. Friends cannot help me put the words to paper. Slumping his bulky body, he looked down at broad hands holding a glass and muttered, "Writing is a terrible responsibility. You feel dead afterward." Silence filled the room as he drained his glass. And quietly, almost to himself, he said, "For no one knows you're dead." And with that, he rose, stretched out his arms, and bid farewell. The afternoon sky was dull gray. The summer sun glowed hazily behind the shroud. The strange man strolled west along 2nd Street toward the seawall, then down the steps onto the sand. Crossing the beach, he stopped a moment at the water's edge. A boy appeared suddenly from the mist, took the old man's hand, and together they disappeared into the sea.
All right, thank you, Daryl. The next person is Steve Mayer, also from Cannon Beach, and he will be reading his short story, Hemingway at Cannon Beach. Steve moved from Eugene to the North Coast 7 years ago. His passion is storytelling, memoirs, and creative nonfiction. He has authored 2 books of prose and is published in various journals and literary sites. In writing his story, Steve endeavors to reflect Hemingway's personality and lifestyle, drawing from Hemingway's short story, Pursuit as Happiness. Steve also attempts to draw close to Hemingway's succinct, terse writing style. Please help me welcome Steve Mayer.
Wow, place filled up.
It's cookies.
Yeah, it's good to be here, and thank you for being here. You know, writers need an audience, and we appreciate everybody here tonight. It's an honor to be part of this group. This short story came to me about 2 weeks after I received the notice about Hemingway at the beach, and I have not read Hemingway in 50 years. And so I started thinking about it. And by the time I got out of bed that morning, I pretty much had this in my head to write down. So it's entitled Hemingway at the Beach. Flying up the coast from San Francisco is taking far too long for Hemingway. He is crammed in a small plane and impatient as hell. His 2 fishing buddies are asleep and snoring, ignoring the coastal landscape below. Will we ever get to Oregon? It seems like we're going to the end of the earth. The pilots smile and noise earnest. Those fish aren't going to wait. Can we land on the beach and charter a boat? Well, the North Coast is a long way. Be patient. We're almost there, the pilot says, cautiously avoiding a smile. Soon, the small plane circles Seaside's landing strip. Touching down causes, finally, waking up his 2 fishing buddies. They eagerly hop off the plane. Nearly in unison, they shout, "It's freezing here. Where are our jackets? I can't handle this cold." Ernest amuses, tough enough guys. We're no longer in Havana or Key West. A Jeep pulls up, loads guys and gear, and drives away with little attention to pilot and plane. Before we head to our fishing charter, the driver announces, I'm going to backtrack a bit and take you and show you one of the most beautiful beaches on the planet. Are the fish going to backtrack too? Where the hell are we going? Says Hemingway. Cannon Beach. Trust me, it's worth it. It better not take too long. And have a good bar. The driver informs, well, look at the ridge to the west. Lewis and Clark went over that ridge trading with the Indians. The fishermen are unimpressed. It's merely a boring footnote in a good fishing story. Time slows, everyone's crowded in the Jeep, and Hemingway is unhappy. Finally, the driver says, hey, we're in Cannon Beach. Wait till you see it. You will agree that it's well worth a short side trip. The three fishermen walk to the top of the dune and look up and down the beach. You gotta be kidding, Ernest says. Where are the piers and the fishing boats? He stands with his hands on his hips. I'm not interested in surfing and sunbathing. That's for those pretty boys who want tans and women. I'm not taking my shirt off to get sunburned. Let's get out of here, one of his friends yells. Far too many tourists scare the fish away, Hemingway murmurs. I bet the locals don't even own a fishing pole. How many do you have fishing? Another friend adds, let's find a bar. This place does nothing for me. It can't get me to the fish, if there are any left. Forget the bar, Hemingway murmurs. Let's grab some cold beer, head to the closest harbor, charter a fishing boat, get a cheap hotel, and find some rare marlin steaks. In disgust, Hemingway turns away from the beach, shaking his head. No boats, no docks, no fish, no fun. I don't believe it. Why am I here? And the driver, dismayed at his reaction, informs him that there are no marlin steaks either. What the hell? Shouts Ernest, raising his hands to the heaven. What kind of place is this?
So how many of us actually have fishing poles? A few. Okay. Our next writer is Celeste Devaney from Nehalem, and she will read A Dog's Tale. Celeste has 2 romance novels published under the name of Celeste Joy. She is currently writing a novel-length mystery and, believe it or not, sermons. She has been pastor at the Nehalem Bay United Methodist Church since last September. Celeste is also a self-described total history geek who manages to weave the past into everything she writes. The action of the story she wrote for this event that she's reading about actually happened to her one winter day walking on Manzanita Beach, and she was delighted to see the parameters of the Cannon Beach Library's Writers Read celebration to be able to share it. Please help me welcome Celeste.
This is A Dog's Tale. A dull, leaden sky mirrors the steel gray of the Pacific today. The beach doesn't welcome me in the winter, not like it does in summer when warm sand coats my toes and playful waves beckon. No, today cold whitecaps foam and chase me, reminding me that the Pacific still ebbs and flows and sometimes crashes, no matter the color of the sky. I refuse to run from the waves. And because of my refusal, each of my feet now weighs 20 pounds as water soaks my jeans, fills my shoes, and freezes my toes. Oh God, where is the joy of the beach hiding in these winter months? After a few sodden, weary steps, I see a dog off to my left, small, shaggy, of unknown breed. It runs hard and then takes an enormous leap right into the cold, cruel waves. A second later, it emerges, grinning. A dog's grin is a glorious sight. This dog grins with his whole body, face, paws, and tails. He races back to a woman standing away from the water's edge. And being a dog, he yips and yaps and wags his inner dialogue in words that even I, a human, understand. Mom, we're at the beach, Mom, the beach. And I went in the water. Did you see me? Did you see me? So rip the ball and I'll go get it for you. The woman, his mom, I assume, loads her chucket and throws. A neon yellow tennis ball arcs gracefully before it hits the surf, and the dog races to own it before the waves can. Soaked, proud, grinning, he returns to a shower of praises. And again, his words are easy to translate. Mom, you saw me, right? I got it. I got it. I got it. Throw it again. Throw it again. Throw it again. The ball is duly thrown again, and the wet pooch races back into the drink. This goes on for several minutes, and the dog's unrestrained joy fails to diminish. Rather, his full body grin grows bigger with each baptism and each soggy ball return. I watch until my frozen toes remind me it's time to go. But as I turn to trudge back to my car, I believe the sky has lightened a bit. My feet feel lighter too, even though they remain waterlogged. And I grumble and pray, God, can't you give me some of the joy that dog has at being at the beach today? And then I stop and I realize she just did.
And any of us who have dogs, I don't, I have 2 cats, so it doesn't apply to me. But anybody of you who has dogs, you know just exactly what they do on the beach and how happy they are. So thank you for reminding us of that. Our next writer is Butch Friedman of Cape Mears, and he will read his short story, An Old Man Surfs. Writer and teacher Butch Friedman lives in Cape Mears. He's an avid surfer and an all-around beach bum. Butch published Fancy Pants, an autobiographical novel, in 2008, and Beach Bum, A Life in Pieces, in 2018. His short prose works have appeared in numerous publications. One of his short stories was nominated for a Pushcart Prize. He is working on a collection of short stories about old folks and dogs. And didn't we just hear? You've got plenty of material. He has facilitated writing workshops for Right Around Portland, Havura Shalom, Multnomah Arts Center, Art Accelerated, and the Hoffman Center for the Arts in Manzanita. Please help me welcome Butch Friedman.
It was sort of an homage to Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, to the man and the bird. The old man should have stayed home and read a book or worked on replacing some loose planks in the upper deck. Instead, Sandy grabbed his board and headed down to the beach. Maybe today, he muttered as he walked a few blocks to the surf. Then the sight and the sound of the ocean brought his thinking to a halt. Sandy set about waxing his board, pulled on his booties and hood, and made his way down the rocky path to the beach. There was no one else in sight, no other surfers to acknowledge this was Sandy's beach, his place. He claimed it over the years. He was out here almost every day. No matter the season or the weather, you just have to be patient, he told his wife, Lily. Eventually, the waves will come. They always do. Is that some sort of philosophy, she asked, smiling? A guide for living?
It's not a bad one, he replied. Sometimes Lily would go with him to the beach and walk while he was in the surf, but not today. It wasn't until he had made it out past the first set of breakers that he realized the waves were bigger than usual. There'd been a heavy rain the night before. Sandy would wait for the manageable waves, though none seemed to fit that description, and he was anxious for a ride. That was the thing that brought him out here when all good sense said not to. It was the rush, the excitement. He wanted that still. Never too old, he told Billy more than once. Keep telling yourself that. Billy laughed, and so did Sandy. But maybe he could manage this big roller surging toward him. He paddled into position and waited for it. Here goes, Sandy yelled as he felt the force of the wave catch him up. He looked down the slope and tried to stay calm as the board slid down the peak. Then he was up and pulling hard to the left to get into the curl. For the next 30 seconds, he was at one with the wave, the ocean, his life perfect. He turned out and began paddling back. The tide was filling out, and with it came the larger swells. Just one more, he told himself. And there it was, about 30 yards off, a major gonzo of a wave rising up behind a set of smaller breaks. Sandy paddled into position, wondering if he should go for it. But then, like all good days surfing, he forgot about thinking and swung the board around. He knew from the first moment that the wave was too big, steep as the side of a cliff. Sandy was looking straight down a slide of more than 20 feet. He clutched the rails in fear, forgetting all form, hoping he could somehow slide through, ride the break like he'd done so many times before. But he also knew what a wipeout felt like when it was coming. This wave was not going to let him ride. It was going to smash him down without pity, like a kid with a toy he no longer wanted. It was in that moment, before he was driven down, that Sandy relaxed. In that long second, he felt release from all the darkness and disappointments of this life. He may have even smiled. Sandy was finally at peace. He was ready to let go.
Thank you, Butch. Appreciate that. Our first Zoom participant will be meeting Diane Greenwood. Hello, Diane. And she's from Portland, and she's going to be reading her short story, On First Seeing. Diane moved to Cannon Beach as a full-time resident in 1976 to write. At that time, Cannon Beach provided a haven for all artists. Her focus was on poetry. She and her husband, John Williams, ran the McBee Court Motel. Her two sons, Brian and Craig Frary, graduated from Seaside High School. Diane taught briefly at Clatsop Community College. Years later, she studied with Janet Fitch, author of White Oleander, in LA, and Tom Spanbauer, who wrote The Man Who Fell in Love with the Moon in Portland. And I remember Tom Spanbauer's classes at Haystack Rock, the Haystack classes. He taught a lot of those here. She has been writing and working as a family therapist in Portland for over 20 years. Her debut novel about the Carlton sisters launches mid-June. She hopes to present the book in Cannon Beach through the Cannon Beach Book Company this summer. On First Seeing, her story, was born out of trying to stand in Hemingway's shoes later in his life, with all of his accumulated history and the hauntings that followed him during those last years. Please help me welcome Diane Greenwood.
We had traveled a long distance and I was tired. Then we came through the trees and closer to where we were going. That's when I knew that the long road over the mountain pass would forever stretch behind me like an occasional memory that leaps out of the unexpected. I wasn't prepared, though, for the gap in the trees or the surreal distance, near and yet so far away. A citadel or giant rock that lifted itself into the heights. I was struck by the mass against the grayer than gray sky. We came closer, and the hump of the hill proved to be the last barrier. I was finally here in a place I'd never been, and I was glad in a way I hadn't been for too long. We did not take the first turnoff through the trees into town. We went on, past the second entrance until we reached the third. My companion informed me that this particular road would take us right to the edge of the water. He had assured me that winter is best for an introduction to the wild Pacific in this part of the world. The waves are highest, and the full fury of the ocean is palpable even on just seeing it. We edged the Jeep in the direction of the visible sea. A sign said Tolovano. It's an Indian name, I'm told. So many of the places in North America are named for indigenous people, and that is its own honoring. My companion eased our Jeep closer to the water, and without warning, the white crest of peaking waves filled the horizon. My imagination took hold. In that moment, the waves became an invading army. The cresting peaks, an entire battalion, moving forward in a mostly straight line. This battalion was meant to take and capture the beach it was rushing toward. A battalion like I had seen in Spain. A battalion where I followed with an ambulance. The army now rushed ashore and broke ranks. They were followed by the next wave of soldiers behind them. They were intent on their mission and eager to win. Determination was always our motto. That day was no different. My companion eased the Jeep into position, close without becoming swamped by the rush coming at us. Something went silent inside of me. The sight ahead of the Jeep became awash with memories of where I'd been and what I'd seen. The devastation of what it means to be human. Like a meditation, my mind quieted. I had no wish to speak and describe what I saw, but something impelled me to leave the calm inside the Jeep and step out into the wind and the rain lashing the air. A cold chill ran beneath the wind. I knew then that I was encountering the spirit of something I'd only felt, had only guessed. I didn't need to understand, and I didn't need to explain. The rain, the wind, the ocean's tumult stilled what had been restless and unsettled inside of me. I stood in the elements as though I was standing in prayer. There was a reverence I would not know again until the day I gathered my thoughts to write a movable feast. I will always remember that day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. We have another Zoom participant now, Craig Allen Heath from Longview, who will read his short story, Papa at Cannon Beach. Craig decided he wanted to be a novelist at age 14. And this is a man who sticks by his goals because 50 years later, he published his first novel in 2022 titled Where Will You Die? In those 5 decades, he wrote hundreds of poems, songs, stories, essays, articles, plays, and scripts. The published portion of that catalog earned him enough income to spend a long weekend's lodging at a comfort inn somewhere along Interstate 5 in California's Central Valley. We writers understand that, don't we? He made his living during that time as a journalist, technical writer, and pen for hire. This portion of his output kept body and soul together, making him a decent prospect to marry, raise a son, see a bit of the world, and have enough left over to buy that comfy recliner his teenage self never thought he'd want. He lives in Southwest Washington with his wife, Pat, too much lawn to mow, a vegetable garden, and a mischievous pair of doggos, Shepherd Lobo and Husky Aura, whose antics earn them the nicknames Thang 1 and Thang 2. Craig is now working on his book, Killing Buddhas, the sequel to his first story about Alan Wright in Eden Ridge. Ideas for other books form a lengthy list. He hopes for enough eyesight and breath to write the good ones. Please help me welcome Craig Allen Heath.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for the warm welcome. Am I coming through okay?
Yes, you're doing fine.
Excellent. Okay. Wish I could be there, but a big shout out to Nancy and Jennifer and the folks at the library for the tech magic to allow us to be here who could not travel. Hemingway has been a god in my literary pantheon since I was in high school. And in the 1980s, I submitted to the Bad Hemingway contest. So when I saw this, I jumped at the chance. I admire Hemingway's work, and I love to write parody, even though Papa himself said the step up from writing parodies is writing on the wall above the urinal. In that one I did long ago, I borrowed heavily from the Nick Adams stories and from The Sun Also Rises. This one is a bald-faced ripoff of the opening paragraphs to The Old Man and the Sea. He was an old man who flew alone every summer on the beach near Haystack Rock, and he had gone 84 days now without lofting his kite. The first 40 days, a boy had been with him, but after 40 days, the boy's parents had told him that the old man was now definitely and finally windless, which is the worst form of unlucky. And the boy had gone at their urging to assist a young woman who could fly 2 kites at once and raise them on the slightest breeze. It made the boy sad to see the old man at the end of each day with his kite grounded and his line slack. And he always went down to help him coil the line and carry the kite, which was the old diamond kind and was threadbare and patched and looked like a flag of permanent defeat. The old man was thin and gaunt, and his cargo shorts hung baggy and low on his hips. He went barefoot, which was the old way, while the young new flyers wore Tevas and Birkenstocks, and even Crocs made from crude oil, which the old man found distasteful. A man should feel the sand between his toes, he told the boy often, or he cannot properly find the wind and raise his kite as high as it can go. There had been years when the old man seemed to fly his kite on a whisper of wind, and the boy believed him about the bare feet and took off his sandals and hid them in the rocks while he helped the old man with the extra reels of line and warned him of running into the other flyers. But those days had gone, and now the old man had not lifted his kite from the ground for 84 days. And so the advice about the bare feet seemed to lose all magic. The sun fell low behind the big rock, and the old man squinted his eyes toward the west, winding the last of his line slowly onto the spindle without knowing his hands were working. His kite lay still like a landed fish as he walked slowly to it, reeling the line as he had done since he first helped his father fly long ago. The boy watched him and believed he saw in his wrinkled face the many shapes and colors of the kites he had flown over the years. He was old, but undefeated. "Sandy," the boy said to him, as they walked slowly to where the kite lay just above the line of surf, "I could fly with you again. Fraser gave me time off." The old man had taught the boy to fly, and the boy loved him. "No," the old man said, "you're with a lucky flyer. Stay with her." "But remember how you went 87 days without a single lift? And then you flew 3 at once? 2 big box kites and a dragon with a tail as long as Haystack Rock is tall?" "I remember," the old man said. "I know you did not leave me because you doubted. It was my parents who made me leave. They explained the situation to me very logically and patiently, and we wrote a contract and signed it. And so I am bound to not help you by my signature and the notary stamp on the paper." "I know," the old man said. "It is quite normal. They haven't much faith." "No," the old man said, "but we have, haven't we?" "Yes," the boy said.
Yeah.
Thank you, Craig. I enjoyed that. Our next writer is Jennifer Nightingale. She's no stranger to Writers Read. I think she's participated, and this is a blind selection, folks. She's participated every year in our 5 years. Tonight, she's going to read a poem and a short story as well. Her poem is Papa's Fiddlestick, and her short story is called Eelgrass. Jennifer lives in Astoria with her husband, Holt Moore, who is also going to be part of this, I think. Isn't that right? Yes. And her dog, Mickey. Her coastal coming-of-age novel, Alberta and the Spark, debuted in 2019. Jennifer has been a lifelong poet and a regular at Rick's Poetry Open Mic in Astoria. Jennifer is honored and surprised to be included in the 2023 Writers Read selection for Hemingway at the Beach. The theme this year, Hemingway, was a tough one for her. She never liked Hemingway, either as a man or an author. He was too I knew I was going to. He didn't like women. And too raw. On the other hand, her husband, Holt, had been a lifelong fan of Ernest Hemingway. Their little house in Astoria was chock-a-block full of Hemingway. Holt's favorite book of all time was called Hemingway's book, Everything He Loved in Life and Lost by Paul Hendrickson. So Jennifer started her dive with this book. She revisited the classic novels and short stories and came to see his merit as an author. He was a complicated and troubled man, and all the more fascinating because he wasn't at all like his self-invented image. The 2023 Cannon Beach Writers Read topic challenged Jennifer to push her own biases aside and dive into Hemingway with a new set of eyes. From this deep dive came the 2 pieces that were chosen, Papa's Fiddlestick and Eelgrass. She is grateful that the Cannon Beach Library nudged her to take a fresh look at this iconic author and personality and to hope for his vast library. Please help me welcome Jennifer Nightingale.
Thank you very much. First of all, I have to ask, does everybody here know what a bindle stiff is?
No.
Okay, for those who don't know what a bindle stiff is, I'm going to ask Colt to come up here.
Give me a second.
See, this is how you stretch your legs.
Yeah, indeed.
Here is your bindle stiff.
Oh.
Now, in the days,
And not chemically induced.
there is a, what do you call it, a flask in here.
Mhm.
These are all the things that maybe Hemingway would have had in his bindle stiffs. A tin of oysters,
Oysters or mussels or something, and a journal.
a journal,
Journal.
definitely a journal.
And there was a book, but
It has a new home.
It has a new home now, yes.
Yes. Anyway, back in the day when I was a little kid, we used to watch cartoons and you would see hobos. They always had a stick with a bag on them. And I didn't know they were, that the stick was called a bindle stiff. But it was in the days before there was wheeled luggage and all that kind of stuff. And they'd walk around, here, put it over your shoulder and give them a.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So anyway, what I've done in Papa's bindle stiff is I use that as a metaphor so that we all are carrying our bindle stiff. And our bindle stiff is filled with all the things that make us who we are. So you can sit down now if you like. Thank you for.
My pleasure, thank you.
Oh dear. Come here. Where are you, you little sticker?
Good job. I don't know where this was in the marriage contract. It must have been the fine print.
Notarized.
Definitely notarized.
Yes.
The beaches are filled with poets, solitary walkers wrapped in coastal mist, carrying their sacks of pain on a bindle stiff, made of driftwood and carved by beaver teeth. Now you may not notice, but if you want to check it out, that particular piece of wood is carved by beaver teeth. The poets have been beaten and bruised. Their minds wander back and forth in time and place, searching for purpose between the surf and the cold sinking sands. One of them saw war, death, and duplicity, and the insides of a warm bar where his name was known, and downed 100 scotch and sodas, or a simple throat-warming amber glass of Calvados. Anyone here had a Calvados? Ah, a Calvados drinker. Anyone not know what a Calvados is? It's a French apple brandy that will warm your insides no matter how cold you are. Collected stories in stinking places, peppered with shrapnel from exploding mortar shells. Suffered unrequited love and a broken heart, and turned it all into something understandable. Perhaps he lived in Paris and filled his notebooks with stories of longing, futility, and despair, living large among the literati, expatriates of the day. Perhaps he watched sharp-horned bulls with pendulous cojones run among macho men with red kerchiefs around their neck, all to honor San Fermin, the patron saint of Pamplona. Perhaps this poet traveled through Africa and courted death in the Congo, Kenya, and Rwanda. Perhaps he took the life of many magnificent creatures that lived in the broad and golden grasslands of the African savanna. Perhaps this poet had profound regrets. Perhaps he let his bindle go. Perhaps this poet was Papa. Thank you. Now, this next one is a short story, and it is a short story. It's called Eelgrass. I met Hemingway at the beach. I didn't know him, but he appeared to know me. He walked beside me for a while, and I had my walking stick in my right hand, and I grabbed his arm with my left. I could feel the oily warmth of his wool sweater, and he provided me with a nice windbreak. "You don't like me," he said. "Why do you say that?" I asked. "Well, you have my books all over your house, but you've never read them." "I like your titles. They read like lines of a poem." I rattled off a few favorites. "The sun also rises from whom the bell tolls. islands in the stream. I could go on. They're all beautiful, I said. Thank you, I think. I used to write quite a lot of poetry after I came back from the First War. War is revolting, but it has inspired some powerful poetry, he said. It kept me from losing my mind. War made some very fine poets. I don't count me among them. You know, you should give me a chance. I can tell a good story. I looked up at him. He had sort of a half smile and was more charming than I expected him to be. So you want to be a writer? I do. Well, do you want some writing advice? Advice? From you? Well, who better? I remember one of your quotes on writing where you said there's nothing to writing. All you do is sit down at a typewriter and bleed. I don't think I ever said that. I'm not that much of an ass. Well, it's been attributed to you. A lot of things have been attributed to me. I'm known as a drinker, for example, but I don't drink while I write. People think I must hold a pencil with one hand while I hold a drink in the other. Hemingway stopped in front of me and turned to face me. He put his hand on my shoulder and dug his fingers in. Hold still, he said. I looked up at him and held utterly still. I could feel his fingers fishing through my hair. Got it, he said, as he pulled a strand of eelgrass from my hair. See this? He held out the piece of seaweed between his thumb and forefinger. The wind tugged at the green strand. He let it go. Don't know how you ended up with that in your hair, but it doesn't belong. You see, that's the secret to telling a good story. Get rid of the extraneous and keep moving. But I can't write like you. Why do you want to? You're not me. You have your own stories to tell, your own way of telling them, and you just need to pull the seaweed out of your hair, brush the sand off your knees, and head out into the wind. And I looked up into his deep-set china blue eyes. His sun-scarred face seemed unexpectedly merry. I reached up and kissed him on the cheek. Thank you, I said, and left him standing there. I walked down the beach. A pink-tinged light reflected off the wet sand. I saw clumps of wet eelgrass at the rack line, and I thought of that one stray strand that landed in my hair. And I looked back at the spot where we had parted ways, and I expected to see him and wave in his direction. But there was nobody there.
Thank you, Jennifer. Our next participant will be on Zoom, Mark Imlay from Longview, and he will be reading his short story, The Young Boy and the Seagull. Mark was raised and schooled in Kent, Washington. He attended University of Puget Sound and Evergreen State College. He then spent 3 years studying and teaching transcendental meditation with Maharaji Mahesh Yogi. After attending Western States Chiropractic College and studying acupuncture and Oriental medicine, Mark practiced chiropractic, nutrition, and acupuncture for 33 years in Kent, Washington. He also taught dance classes for Kent Parks and Green River Community College and led interpretive nature walks in the Sioux Creek Trail Park. In November 2020, Mark self-published his first book, Pilgrimages to a Bullfrog Buddha, a poetry book about meditative traditions and teachings. Mark now spends his time playing pickleball, dancing, playing bass guitar, and writing. It's a tough life, he says, but somebody has to do it.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes, we're fine.
The Young Boy and the Seagull. The morning wind coming off the ocean was bracing. It was the northern tip of the Oregon coast. The sun was up and the chill was leaving with the fog. It was then I saw him, a young boy, perhaps 8 or 9, but small for his age. He was kneeling down, tying something to the end of the line of his fishing pole. I assumed he was baiting his hook. I walked up to observe his technique more closely. To my surprise, there was no hook. Instead, he was tying a strip of tough bacon rind directly to the line. His head turned only slightly towards me as he noticed my presence, then went back to his work. "You're not going to catch anything that way," I said. "Not trying to catch anything," he responded. "I'm in it for the fight." "Well, no fish is going to hold on to that very long." He stood up and prepared to cast his line. "Who said anything about fish?" I'd only vaguely become aware of the gathering seagulls in the air around us. The boy cast his line straight up into the air. One of the circling seagulls veered towards it and grabbed the bacon rind in its mouth and attempted to fly away. Then began the fight. I've done a lot of deep sea fishing in my life, but I have seldom seen such a fight. The boy ran up and down the beach as the gull swooped and turned, causing the pole to bend wildly in various directions. The bacon rind broke and the gull flew away. "Wow, that looked like fun," I exclaimed. "You a ranger?" "No." "Look there." I saw a huge seagull, larger than any I'd ever seen. It was almost a freak of nature, easily 2 or 3 times the size of a normal gull. I think I got his attention. The lad then combed through his rinds and picked the toughest one, wrapping the line several times around the rind and finished with a double knot. Many gulls gathered in the air near us, attracted by the previous action. As the large gull neared, he cast, and the monster grabbed it. Then began the fight that made the previous contest tame by comparison. On and on it went, with the boy running all around, following the bird's aerobatics. He must have run 100 yards away from me and back several times, reeling him in and letting him drag the line out as the situation required. At one point, the line reached the end, and the boy jumped just as a gust of wind hit and the bird soared upward. The boy lifted off the ground and was carried through the air, all the while pumping his legs before landing at a run. On and on this went for 10 minutes or more, though it seemed like hours. Neither were willing to let go of their prize or lose the contest. I could tell both were tiring when the gull headed straight out to sea, dragging the boy into the water. Yet still his grip held. Just then, the line went limp, and it was over. We both gazed out to where the gull disappeared for what seemed an eternity. Suddenly, the great gull rose into the air, and we cheered. Our eyes met for the first time, mine looking like a child's, and his like an adult that's seen more of life than most. I've met many people, most of them uninteresting, but this boy I remember.
Eve Marks. It's time. It's time. Eve Marks is from Seaside, and she will be reading her short story, Nothing's Going to Happen. And listen closely to this story. This is a conversation we have all had who live on the coast. Eve Marks is a bi-coastal journalist specializing in police blotters. She is the author of several books. Her recent essays and nonfiction have been published on the literary website dorothyparkersashes.com. Follow her fiction and personal essay writing on medium.com. She is working on a novel that takes place on the Oregon coast. Please help me welcome Eve Mark.
Been a little while since I've done anything like this. Okay, all right. The story is called Nothing's Going to Happen. They sat at a window, a pretty little table for two. The table was very small. He was anxious where to set his feet. The entire dining room seemed cramped and a little mean, and yet at the same time, somehow elegant. He couldn't complain about the view. They could see the ocean. He tried to catch her eye, but she kept her face in profile, staring intently at the white caps breaking far out off the beach towards the horizon. So, what do you think? He said, toying with the displayed cart of drinks on offer, clamped into a flimsy metal tabletop menu holder. They've got some nice craft cocktails. You pick, she said. 2 mojitos, he told the server. Are you on this again? He said. I'm facing reality, she replied. Reality is what we have right now, he said. But it could all vanish so quickly, she said. They say it only takes 17 minutes, and that is if you are a fast runner. He fiddled with his napkin, wishing he had a cigarette. What a bore, no one smoked. I wonder what the pasta special is tonight, he mused. I heard they forage their own mushrooms. Is that all you can think about, she said, mushrooms? The server appeared to take their order. There were no specials. She ordered a hamburger. He asked for the ling cod. You bury your head in the sand, she said when the server left their table. When it happens, it's not going to spare you either. He shrugged. Don't be a bitch, he said. She returned her gaze to the ocean waters. I don't want to die here, she said. He laughed. What makes you think you're going to die here, he said. You're relatively young. You've got your life, or at least half your life, ahead of you. I've read those geology reports, she replied. The drinks arrived. The recipe called for lime and sugar and mint leaves, but it looked like the bartender substituted something else. She tasted her drink, and it was good, but it wasn't a mojito. You want me to send these back? He asked after taking a sip of his drink. She shook her head and drank deeply from her glass. Don't bother. I prefer to talk about the matter at hand. You think we should sell our house? Get the hell out of here, he said, worrying about something that might never happen. Who says it's never going to happen, she said defensively. They say it's overdue, maybe by 100 years. It could happen any time. Well, if it hasn't happened yet, what makes you think it's going to happen now, he said. I think you're being very silly. This is paradise. Paradise, you say? Our home washed away, everything we own destroyed. You're willing to risk that? We could die, you know. There's only one road out. The bridges will fail. There is no infrastructure. I think you exaggerate, he said. Nothing's going to happen.
How many times have we all heard that?
I think RJ and I've had that conversation.
Yeah. We're dealing with it in Tennessee.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Here, thank you. Russell Myers from Vancouver, who is writing about the library. Russell didn't start writing until 2019, and after a novel and a few short stories, he published his first mystery novel, Whitefish, in 2022, which is available on Amazon. Russell read about the Writers' Read submissions in early December, and the theme Hemingway at the beach made him smile. He immediately thought of the two characters in his story, the boy and the old man, and what they were doing and saying to each other. The hardest part of writing the story was to stop. So the 600-word maximum probably actually helped the story, he said. And yes, he was thinking about the Cannon Beach Library as he wrote it. Please help me welcome.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, TechnoGen and the committee and everyone here and online. This is kind of the fun of it for a writer, at least for me, be able to share. You know, we work hard and it's nice to share it. So, when I was thinking about the Hemingway at the beach, the first thing that came to mind is Hemingway is at the beach, and I know exactly where to find him. And that's the name of my short stories, The Library. The old man's head bobbed several times as he sat behind the long wooden front desk in the coastal town's library. His arms were crossed, his breath shallow. The smell of the books had reminded him of an adventure, and he had returned to that place, which at times had seemed more real to him than even the most vivid memories of his youth. A boy stood in front of the desk, glancing at the covers of books as he waited in silence until the old man's eyes opened. And then he waited a bit more until he was sure the old man had returned. Do you have any books by an author named Hemingway? The boy asked. The old man shifted in his chair, his latest adventure gladly interrupted by someone with far fewer memories. Yes, we do. Are you looking for any of Hemingway's books in particular? I have a list of stories to choose from, the boy answered. My grandfather said I could find them here. You have come to the right place. The boy pulled out a piece of paper from his front pocket and handed the list to the old man. This is quite a list. I only have to read one of them, the boy said. Then he promised to take me fishing. Have you read any of them? I've read them all, the old man replied. The boy had a surprised look. Really? All of them? All of them. You must read a lot. I read every day, the old man said. Sometimes even more than one book. Is that why you work here? To get your books for free? I volunteer here once a week, and the books are free for everyone to check out. Have you been to a library before? Just the school's library, and I know the books are free, but I don't know anybody who reads every day. Is that right? The old man led the boy down several aisles where rows of shelves had been filled with books. Then he stopped at one of the shelves. This is where you will find Hemingway's adventures. Some of the stories on your list will be here, but some are not. Which one should I choose? The old man handed the list back to the boy. Just pick a story from your list. They are all worth reading. Are there any short ones? Some are shorter than others. Which is the shortest? I have read them all, so for me, one is not necessarily shorter than the other. Well, what do you mean? Memories of the stories I've read have nothing to do with the number of pages, but some took longer to read. Some took longer, but I enjoyed the long ones as much as the short ones. And the short ones as much as the long ones? Just as much. I think I'll like the shortest one the most. The old man smiled. Would you like your fishing trip to be short too? What do you mean? The boy asked. If you had to choose, I would choose a longer fishing trip. Are you sure? I'm sure. What if during the longer fishing trip there was not even one bite, but during the shorter trip you caught your limit? Would you still enjoy the longer trip more? The boy thought for a moment, then he smiled. I would enjoy them both.
Well, this is a perfect segue into the next one. Speaking of long books, long stories, short stories, short stories, we have Steve Price from Portland, who will be reading his short story, Leaving Cuba. Steve is a retired Washington County lawyer and judge. He keeps busy bicycling, solving Rubik's Cube, photographing roller derby, which I'd like to know more about, and perfecting his napping technique. Regarding the latter, he practices every day. Please help me welcome Steve.
Thank you. The rain fell on the old man. It was cold. He looked to the ocean. He looked for the sun. He saw it on the grave. Finally, he asked himself, why the hell did I ever leave Cuba?
I almost didn't get my photos in. Thank you. He came all the way from Portland to read Our next reader is James Tweedy. He is, let's see, is that right?
Yes. Or
Okay.
there's someone before you.
Well, there's a couple
There's some
before
more
you.
before
I've got to, yeah.
Yeah.
That's all right, you might slip that. Our next reader is on Zoom, and it's Scott T. Starbuck from Vancouver. And he will be reading his poem, Salmon Prophet. Scott recently donated a watercolor of his former charter boat Starfisher to the Astoria Public Library, his clay salmon poem into the art collection at Lower Columbia College, and his other clay pieces to Battleground Public Library, Washington State University Vancouver Library, and Columbia Basin Fish and Wildlife Library, a program of the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission. The rest of it he buried in the Cascade Mountains as he retired and is traveling with his wife. If interested, you can see those clay pieces on his Trees, Fish, and Dreams climate blog at riverseek.blogspot.com. He taught eco poetry workshops the past 4 years at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and he plans to continue doing that in his retirement. Please help me welcome Scott Starbuck.
Hello, am I coming in loud enough?
Yes, you are.
Yep.
Yeah, so I have to shout out a big hello to Stephen Mayer. I had my volume turned down super low before the event began, and I just saw your face for a second. So Stephen, it's good to see you here. Linda, I hope you're here too. So my poem is Salmon Prophet. We weren't designed for gray concrete raceways. Our ancestors fought up wild rivers 10,000 years to emerald pools and giant trees below snowy peaks. Each fall, they sent their strength through us to the great ocean, keeping the circle alive. Forget about plastic buckets, red dyes, and barcodes. No matter what anyone says or wants you to believe, we are more than food. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it. Our next writer is Elle Schwartz from Wheeler. Elle's story is 12 Steps Famous, and Elle is another person who has read quite a few times in the Writers Read celebration. And I want to remind you that Elle wrote this introduction, not me, but so we'll go. But I'm going to have fun with it anyway. At a big window overlooking Lazarus Island on the north coast of Oregon, Elle Schwartz invents strange stories about dragons and drag who reluctantly save our human asses, and also autofictional performance reviews of shape-shifting actual ex-lovers, and also tales that infuse the shadier idiosyncrasies of the Brothers Grimm into modern tales of redemption or calamity. Bitch Muse is a bitch, and that's why we love her. Yes? All right, Elle, it's all yours.
You said you'd be willing to say those words.
You always challenge me.
Okay, this is called 12-Step Famous. They were famous in 12-step meetings across Tillamook County as Carla, the female human who identified as a male crow, thus the non-binary pronoun. They, them pronouns, no problem. Crow, weird, but we thrive on weird. But Carla's shares were hard to take. We suppressed our groans when they began to recount the dream again. If you were 12-stepping in those days, you know the dream I'm talking about. The crow, formerly known as Carla, wakes up and feels the wings on his back. Crow's bones, long since sloughing marrow in human form, are now fully hollow. Famished for roadkill, Crow, now covered with iridescent obsidian feathers, soars into the dawn. That was it. Nothing else happened. Not a word ever changed in the telling of it. Obeying 12-step etiquette, none of us ever asked Carla whether they got bored dreaming this dream night after night, always the same. We did not ask why they shared it in meeting after meeting from Tillamook to Seaside over and over. Carla was ours, a fixture, always there, like that one chair with the broken leg newcomers invariably sat in. An exercise in tolerance, a topic of gossip during late night calls to our sponsors after the danger of using had passed. What did Carla want from us? None of us, not even the most codependent, ever knew. But when Carla stopped showing up during a stormy week in January, everybody noticed. Everybody wondered why. I knew. I often walked the beach, especially during storms. A storm on the Oregon coast puts everything into perspective, I always said. Carla never said anything about it, but I often saw them at the beach during storms. I saw them running in front of the wind as if they could beat it. I saw them spread their arms and leap as if they could sprout dream wings and fly. Carla always fell hard, landing in a heap, another knot of dulse left behind by the tide. I took care to tread sand upstage left if they crumbled downstage right. I slowed down or sped up if we happened to nearly cross paths on the trail through the dunes. We choreographed enough distance to preserve the illusion of not recognizing one another. Until that January. That storm brought the highest winds in 5 years. Power went down half an hour into it, and there was nothing to do but head for the beach to give our flesh to ravenous elements. I was not surprised to see Carla. They stood at the summit of the dunes, arms out, lime green jacket unzipped and flapping wildly. I walked up the hill behind them, safe from notice, close enough to see their chest expand and contract, near enough to see them go up on their toes and then succumb to gravity, their legs barely catching them with each step. I ran after, their urgency contagious. I almost lost sight of them in the stinging sideways rain. Halfway to the shoreline, Carla stopped at a puddle of driftwood. Carla's jacket, attached only to their wrists now, snapped like a flag. I was almost close enough to touch Carla when a fist of wind snatched the soul out of their chest along with a feral scream. Carla's body yielded to gravity as a crow the size of my thigh galloped away. Crow circled me, fighting the wind, laughing, and then it was gone. A heap of dulse dressed in lime green nylon and brown Carhartts and black rubber boots flopped on the sand, unsure of what to do with arms and legs and a face. I couldn't help. I ran away. It's what Carla would have wanted.
One more and final writer, and then we will have questions from the audience. James Tweedy is going to present his 2 stories, Castaway and Birthday at the Beach. James is a retired pastor who has lived and worked in California, Utah, Scotland, Australia, and Hawaii, and presently lives in Long Beach. He is married with 3 grown daughters and 4 grandchildren. He likes hiking and fly fishing in the Sierras and enjoys composing and creating music. His photography is displayed at the Bay Avenue Gallery in Ocean Park. He has acted with the Peninsula Players Repertory Theater and written and directed one-act plays with them. To date, he has written 6 novels, 3 collections of poetry, and 1 collection of short stories, all published with the Dunecrest Press. His stories have been selected for regional anthologies and online magazines, and his poetry has appeared nationally and internationally in both online and print media. He was awarded first prize in the 2021 International Poetry Competitions sponsored by the Society of Classical Poets and was the winner of the 2020 Edinburgh Festival Flash Fiction Contest. If someone would pay him, he would be a professional optimist, he says. But in lieu of a sponsor, he has been forced to maintain his status as an amateur. Please help me welcome James Tweedy.
Hi, James.
Hello, everybody. I have a button that came undone. Now I am ready. I took the challenge of this Hemingway at the beach in a slightly different way than some of the rest of you have done, in that I am Hemingway at the beach. And my first story is called Castaway. I am told there are sturgeon in the river, white and green, and the rules for catching, keeping, and releasing them are enough to drive a man to drink, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Already I miss the marlin, that leaping cerulean monarch of the sea who duels to the death, and in defeat can take a boy who is strong enough to muscle it into a boat and turn him into a man. The sea, even when calm and serene, is a wild, monstrous beast, easily provoked into seething fury by wind and currents, stirred to life by forgotten storms thousands of miles away. Today I find myself a castaway, thrown up as if by some unseen typhoon and stranded far from home on a Pacific Northwest beach. If the sea dashes madly about, the beach merely yawns as it lulls in the sun on a cloudless day. For unlike the sea, the beach is tame and passive as it slowly wastes away, its sand blown by the wind, its stones polished by the surf, its larger rocks and pools a home for urchins, starfish, and dark translucent blennies that flit and flicker their way from one small crevice to another. I dig toes into warm sand and dream of warmer, whiter beaches in Key West, where finely ground coral turns the sea into more shades of blue than a man might count in a lifetime. Yet there is beauty here as well, although of a different kind. Sea stacks and precipitous cliffs that shatter waves into water diamonds, sparkling like crown jewels, but only for a moment, before they return to the gray monotones of the sea that spawned them. Old growth cedars, when they could still be found, hoary with age, unbent and unbroken, until reduced to stumps by men wielding axes and saws. Elk and black-tailed deer, bald eagles and cormorants, pikas and porcupines, rockfish and salmon, each a part of the once wilderness that surrounds me. And the Columbia, the second largest westward flowing river in the world. Only the Congo is bigger. As I lie on the beach, I pass through time like a grain of sand in an hourglass set to Pacific Standard Time. Back home in Florida, the marlin are not as big or as plentiful as they once were. Perhaps it is the same with the sturgeon in the river. But in one sense, the sea is the same, for the horizon stretches just as far in both places. This next story needs a little context, and I'll give that to you. It's set in 1938, and during that time, Hemingway was a correspondent syndicated writing articles on the Spanish Civil War.
And while he was there, he became reconnected with someone he had known earlier, and whose name was, let me get the right, Martha Gilhorn. And they became infatuated with each other as they experienced their time in Spain, as his marriage here with his second wife, whose name was, I have that here too, Pauline, was falling apart. And he made 2 trips from Spain back to visit her in Key West in 1938. He had 3 children there. And this is said when he didn't really want to be with her. When he came back from the Spanish Civil War, he moved to Havana. And Martha moved there with him. And in 1940, he divorced Pauline and married Martha. That's a little bit of backstory, okay? This is set when things are falling apart in his relationship with Pauline, and his interest in his family was waning. And he was really still, even though he was at a birthday party for his 3rd son here at Cannon Beach, his heart and his mind is still back in Spain in the Civil War and with Martha. So everything that happens at this birthday party that he doesn't want to be at triggers a memory and a longing of someplace else in his life. So this is the birthday party at the beach. There is a cake on the table, flat, square, blue as Moroccan tile, oozing sweetness like sweat on a Kalahari afternoon, with 7 frosted rosebuds, the color of Martha's lips. She who kept me warm during the autumn nights we spent in the Sierra Nevada south of Granada as we covered the fascist advance against the Republic. And the sound of diapered infants, like the high-pitched screeching whine of lead passing overhead, like the screams and mewling cries of Miguel as he lay dying in the dust at my feet. Oh, and there is a donkey too, without a tail, like Pedro, who carried Miguel's body to Dilar, where we buried him in the cemetery next to the Church of Our Lady of Sorrows. A piñata, shaped like a bull, with white cardboard horns, is hung from the trellis above the patio. It is filled with toys, candy, and coins, like the giant paper burro that took 7 hits with a heavy stick before it broke during the siege of Madrid. The night Martha and I embraced one final time before I left Spain with the promise to return before the spring. The bull is dashed from the trellis with a mighty swing by a boy who removes his blindfold and stands as proud and tall as a matador celebrating a kill in Pamplona. Presents wrapped with colored paper and ribbon, torn open like wooden crates of carbines, and ordnance supplied by the Soviets in support of loyalist volunteers. Children's smiles as wide as Diego's when he detonated the explosives that destroyed the railroad bridge at Segovia. And laughter, happy children's laughter, unlike the riotous prattle of starving artists and expatriates drowning their sorrows in new wine at Les Deux Magots in Saint-Germain. Innocent, mindless laughter of children that makes one long for the camaraderie of Les Deux Magots. Cramped, oppressive clatter and chatter that drive a man mad if he cannot find a reasonably good excuse to flee, yet tolerable with a glass of whiskey in one hand and a glass of rum in the other. The cake, like tobacco, fit to be chewed, but only with the intention of spitting it out without swallowing it. Slap on the back. Happy birthday, son. The beach house empties.
life, if such can be called by that name, returns. Like a rainbow in the eye of a passing hurricane.
Thank you, James. All right, let's take some questions. Does anybody in the audience have any questions for any of our writers? All right, well, I'll start it out then. I never ask a journalist if she has a question. First of all, I'd like to ask the writers, how did you approach this year's theme? We've had other kind of more general themes in the past, but how did you approach this year's theme, and how did you decide what you wanted to write? And they're thinking.
Ted Williams used to tell the rookies on the Red Sox, if you don't think too good, don't think too much, you'll just hurt the club. So I didn't try to reread any Hemingway or, explore the multifacets of Hemingway. I just picked like one thing and went with it, and that was it.
All right, so you just thought about the gray skies and getting out. Anybody want to add anything to it? How about our Zoom writers? How did you approach the topic? Why did you decide to write the thing that you wanted to write? Come on, don't talk all at once.
Okay,
Diane?
this is Diane. Yes. Wow, it just happened so organically. When I first heard the subject, it was a little daunting to me to write from a man's point of view. But I'm a big fan of Hemingway's, and the style of his sentences was part of what was very appealing to me. So I worked very hard with those sentences to try to get as close as I could get. And my favorite book, which is probably, anyhow, is A Movable Feast. And last time I read it, I was traveling in Paris about 7 years ago, and that was my reading for that book, for that trip. Anyhow, it was a challenge, but I had to sleep on it for 2 or 3 nights. And then one day during a nap, the vision came of him as an older man standing at the water and imagining those horrific battles in Spain. That's how it came. Thank
All right.
you.
Anybody else like to add anything?
Yeah, this is Scott Starbuck. So I thought about the debate between Steinbeck and Hemingway, and I love Grapes of Wrath, and I love The Old Man and the Sea. And of course, they hated each other deeply, and they both won the Nobel Prize. So I figured that, with social criticism and conscience of Steinbeck, that's who he was. And Grace Under Pressure with his marlin fishing and big game hunting, that was Hemingway. So I was thinking, like, what is a salmon really? And that brought that poem. Thanks for asking.
All right. Anybody have any questions from the audience? Jennifer, did you want to?
Oh, I just wanted to mention that the men with the bindle stiff here, we go 3 to 4 times a week and go scouting for garbage on the beach and collect it in a big bag. And in order to carry a big heavy bag, created bindle stiffs off of beaver wood. And as he's walking down the beach with this big piece of beaver wood and this big garbage bag full of stuff, I'm sitting there thinking about Hemingway and thinking about, of course, the bindle and all the things that are in it as a sort of metaphor for something that all poets carry with them. So This guy here with his bindle and his garbage bag, that was mine.
So you're a stand-in for Hemingway, is that basically?
I'll take it.
He's got the beard. All right, that's true. You don't kind of look.
Okay, I just want to say one thing. What I really liked about this is because I'm going through a dry period. I write a lot of poetry. I haven't written many short stories. My mother was my favorite reader. I would actually write for her, and she passed away some months ago, 101. So it wasn't a big thing. But then I thought, well, I didn't have her to write stories for, so I was writing more poetry. But this was like what do I call them? A prompt. Yeah, it was like a challenge, and it's said, okay, let me see if I can do something with that, and I really appreciated that. In fact, the first thing I wrote in the style of Hemingway was a short story set in Spain during the Civil War, and then of course had nothing to do with the beach. So then I wrote 3 short ones, and 2 were selected for this, and then I wound up writing another short story in third person. If any of you write in third person, that's not a very popular thing, and editors hate it. But I wrote a Hemingway story in third person, which he never did, but set in Spain during the Civil War again, but with the emotional feel of Hemingway. And I found that really refreshing and opened my mind to different ways of writing. So I want to thank you. This was great.
One other question is, most of you have had published works. I'm getting an arrow here. Oh, okay. Do you have a question?
I have a question for Mark Emily.
Okay.
How did you get the idea for your story about the seagulls?
Mark Imlay. You're muted. There you go.
There, okay, sorry. The first step was when they said it was okay to do something a little humorous. And I just thought of various titles. In fact, I thought of lots of various titles, offtakes on the titles that might be humorous. Like I thought of maybe writing about an untamable horse in terms of 2 books, one called For Whom the Dell Rolls, and the other A Farewell to Barnes. That I didn't pan out. And then I thought of another one, a story loosely based on a tale told by a barmaid called From Beer to Maternity. Finally, I settled on The Young Boy and the Seagull, obvious off-take on The Old Man and the Sea. And the second step was when I was young, I had a friend who was this was in late elementary school. He was a couple of years older than me, so there was a little bit of an unbridgeable gap between us there. But he told me about doing this with fishing for seagulls with bacon rind, and not a hook, but just a line. And it captured my imagination then, and still does. And I've never done it myself, but don't know if I ever will. Maybe with my grandson, I don't know. But it just captured my imagination, and I thought it was something that might capture Hemingway's imagination also. And that's how I came up with the story.
Anybody else like to add anything? Okay. Most of you have published works, books, poems, short stories, so forth, in the real world. How does this experience differ from what you were used to writing?
The word limit.
The word limit. Can't go on forever, huh? Yeah.
I actually sent my story in originally with 610 words, and Nancy sent it back.
Well, I am an editor.
I think, like what was said before, it was a prompt. And, when you're writing the novel, you don't really get prompts. So it's kind of fun to have a prompt to write out. I think that was fun.
Well, that leads me to my next question, and that is, what kind of themes would you like to see Writers Read Celebration pursue in the future?
I thought it was really fun to do something in the style of a known author. So that had an added twist, especially somebody who has written such diverse things. And the topics were so broad, but a clear style.
Okay, that's good to know. That's very good to know.
I think we should try something about writing above the urinal on the wall. No, seriously, the parody and the humor, what we just heard from him with those titles, hilarious. I don't know whether everyone's inclined to humor, but there should be some, maybe, I would love to see more creativity in that direction. But the other as well, because it's marvelous. But
So you want some bathroom humor? I personally never read anything above that. That would be, 50% of the.
That sounds like it's a second event, though. I think that's a whole other,
Well, there you go.
different audience,
Yeah,
probably.
yeah, absolutely.
Oh, my reference was to parody.
All right, anybody else? Any other thoughts about themes?
Well, the thing is, it's so wonderful about this event is that even with this Hemingway theme, it did take us to the beaches and the crashing waves and all to the salmon and all of that. So, somehow if it's woven back in that we're writing from this little place on the earth, I find that very sort of inspiring. And sort of the sideways prompt is also wonderful as well. But it's nice to think that the kind of writing that we're doing is going to be different than what you're going to see in Ohio or London or, Beijing.
So kind of keep that beach theme, but keep extending a little bit more. Okay.
That sort of wet coast.
Wet coast. Do any of you on Zoom have any thoughts about potential themes? Elle, it looks like you want to say something.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I did. All right. It's just telling me to unmute, but I think I did. I would love to see encouragement to play with time and alternate histories and things like that somewhat. Folklore elements, a bit more fantasy.
Okay, that sounds good. All right. Taking
This
notes.
is Craig, real quick, just to say that I've never been to Cannon Beach. I was really looking forward to come to be with you now, but sorry, I couldn't. But by virtue of the theme having to be, North Coast, Oregon, I looked into the area and found this wonderful place. So I think if you kept the themes, tie them to Hemingway, tie them to another author, tie them to anything, but keep your local community as part of the theme, I would encourage that, because it just brought me to know a really nice place that I want to come visit now.
Well, it's funny. I was going to ask you a question, and it's interesting that you say you've never been to Cannon Beach, because you mentioned in your story about the boy having time off, that Fraser gave the boy time off. We had a very well-known kite store owner here named John Fraser, and he was quite the prankster. And unfortunately, he died a few years ago. And I was wondering if you knew him at all, but you've never been to Cannon Beach.
No, I've never been to Cannon Beach, but when I learned of this celebration and that the theme had to do with, the Oregon coast, I began to research Cannon Beach, and I learned of the kite shop, Once Upon a Breeze, and who owned it, and how long it had been around, and how much it was a part of Cannon Beach. And so I threw that in there because only because I learned it from the research that was an element locally that was really important. And if there's anything that The Old Man and the Sea is about, it is about that real local place where those fishermen were. So I wanted to try to find a way to depict that, something very, very specific and very local. Never been there, but I was able to look it up. Thank you, Internet.
Well, thank you for alluding to him, because I think he was well loved in Cannon Beach. All right, any questions, any other comments from the audience before we do the big giveaway, I want to say? All right, so thank you all readers for participating. We really appreciate it, and to show our appreciation, we would like to give you a little token of our appreciation. So,
Thank you.
little, they are Hemingway bookmarks.
Very nice. Very
You
nice.
can get
Thank you.
anything on Amazon nowadays.
I know who's gonna steal mine.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's lovely. Thanks.
It's a nice momentum, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it definitely won't give you enough income to for a night's lodging in the Central Valley of California, but it is. Again, thank you for coming. We have coffee, tea, cookies, and we also have a book of the submissions that we received. We collected all of the submissions that we received and put them in a little book. It's back there on the table. So
I
feel
wonder if
free
they ever
to
answer that question.
imbibe.
One more time.